Okay, we're going to be moving into our next session. So as people just come back to their tables, I'm looking out and it looks as though there's been about 2 people that have changed and everyone else has just stayed in their seats. So if you feel like just moving, just to hear a bit of a different voice or just different perspective, you've got about 30 seconds to make that move now. Thanks. One of the joys of talking to each other at morning tea is certainly to catch up and to just make that connection, and that's so important. Hopefully some of you learnt something about why the other person that you're talking to enjoys their job, recognising that our job is not just a job, but there's a mission field and something that we are all called to by the Lord. Our next session, for the next hour, we will be looking at a session titled, "What mental health issues have we observed in our students, and how does the Bible speak to those issues?" So we have got Christine Hill, who is going to be presenting to us today. Christine is the Executive Manager for Education for Corinity, the care arm of Queensland Baptist. In this role, she is responsible for 5 schools throughout Queensland, as well as seeking out opportunities for new schools. The Corinity schools minister to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and aid them to overcome social, economic and educational barriers to their learning. Prior to this role, Christine has worked in a number of Christian schools in both Queensland and New South Wales as an English, history and legal studies teacher. She also has served in some leadership roles, primarily relating to curriculum. Schools she has been privileged to serve in include Westside Christian College, John Paul College, St Paul's Grammar School in Penrith and Innerburgh School. Christine is also a Director of Associated Christian Schools. Please join me in welcoming Christine.
Well, it's always good when we have a mask directive to be able to be a person who's in front of a microphone. I found that at church yesterday as well. It gives you the advantage that you don't have to wear the mask, just for a few minutes. Now, I'm aware I have a difficult task here because I stand between you and lunch, and the topic that we have to deal with is enough for us to talk for a whole day. I'm doing a whole year's course at QUT at the moment on trauma-aware education, so it's certainly much broader than the hour that we have. So being aware of that, I did prepare a PowerPoint, but I provided copies on your table of the PowerPoint because I'm certainly not going to read everything. I'm not going to go in detail through everything. And then you have another 2 documents in front of you also. One is a sheet that's headed up, "What is my ACE score?" And you'll understand a bit more about that when I speak about that shortly. And the other one is some Bible verses from the NIV, which relate to the topic of mental health for you to use when the time comes for your discussion. So if you're like me, probably 12 to 15 years ago, I had spent all of my teaching career in very perhaps easy schools to be in, predominantly schools with a Christian education focus. I spent 12 years in Sydney at the Innerburgh School after I had graduated. Then I had the privilege of working with Dr. John Collier at St Paul's Grammar School in Penrith. I've hit the jackpot everywhere, I think. I really felt like I had gone to heaven when I went to Westside Christian College. But there came a point in time and God said to me, I have something else in mind for you. You need to go somewhere else. And I ended up at Corinity Education Southside, which was then called Southside Education Centre. By the second morning that I had been at the school, by 9 o'clock in the morning, we'd had 2 ambulances and 7 police officers on site. I had absolutely no knowledge that in Brisbane we have a severe issue with poverty, we have a severe issue with mental health conditions, and I was totally oblivious to that. I can tell you about the young lady in our school who had a bit of an odour problem, and we went to speak with this young lady and she said to us, "I don't have a shower because there's 15 people in our 2-bedroom house. There are no locks on the bathroom door," and she'd just become an adolescent. And so our school took her to the shops, we purchased her sets of clothes. She would come and shower at school every day, change her clothes, we'd wash her clothes. There's a total other world out there that many of us probably don't experience. One of the things we've certainly seen a lot of is anxiety. And given the problems with COVID, the lockdowns, the mask wearing, all the things going on in the media, we have a lot of students who would probably have issues with anxiety now. That's a rising demographic for us. And you might be familiar with some of those. We have students who suffer from depression, and of course adolescence is a particularly sensitive time there because young people's brains are developing and occasionally the chemicals become a little imbalanced in their brains, and depression is really a disease for young people which can lead to suicidal ideation, which is something that you'll see later. But certainly young people are losing the ability to enjoy things, to have pleasure in the simple aspects of life. That's one of the reasons why at Southside we have a holiday program for the students, because many of the students there from backgrounds of poverty don't have the opportunity to do things like go to the movies, go to a picnic. Some of them have never been to the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast to go to the beach. We take the students during the school vacation period for activities like that so that they learn to have the simple pleasures. I've learnt that the girls really enjoy tie-dyeing. That's one of our most popular activities. Something quite simple, but helping them to have pleasure. I think we're probably a little more familiar with substance abuse, but perhaps not so much the reasons for substance abuse and the numbing effect that that has for young people who have very difficult lives. Eating disorders also you may be familiar with. Phobic disorders, where we might have a specific phobia and it's more than just fear. This is something that provokes a reaction in the body. And young people will have a rapid heart rate. Their breathing will increase. It's certainly beyond something that they have an ability to control. Occasionally we will see psychotic disorders, although mental health practitioners are very reluctant to diagnose a number of these prior to adulthood. And when I hear of young people who they're suspecting have some of these conditions, then we know that they're probably at the extreme end of the spectrum. Suicidal ideation may be something that you've been familiar with in your schools. I do note also that the anniversary of a suicide or the mere fact of one suicide can lead to the copycat syndrome. And I apologise for the pace, but there's so much to get onto here. Trauma. trauma is the one that I really want to focus on because trauma is something that can lead young people to have bodily reactions to stimulus because of their experiences in the past. Bessel van der Kolk has this lovely explanation of trauma, that trauma is a wound. It's something that's come as a result of experiences, and it's something that needs to be healed. I've often said that the students in our schools have very little hope, or in our Community schools, have very little hope. The one hope they need is the hope of Jesus, because I know that Jesus is the healer, and he can certainly heal these conditions. You have the ACE score questionnaire. The ACE study was originally conducted between 1995 and 1997 in Southern California, and there were more than 17,000 responses to this study. 2/3 of people who responded had at least one adverse childhood experience. More than 20% of those who responded had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And as the number of those adverse childhood experiences increases, so does the risk for a range of negative outcomes in life. Early death, traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, unintended pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, serious illnesses such as cancer or diabetes, drug or alcohol dependency as people try to numb themselves. And it also results in reduced educational outcomes, reduced capacity for engaging in employment, and reduced future income. They're quite serious consequences. And the extent of that study and the fact that it's been replicated since that time should lead us to question, first of all, how many of us have had adverse childhood experiences, but how many of our students have had adverse childhood experiences. I agree that last week at the Teachers' Conference was an outstanding conference. And when Dr. Catherine Ball stood up, she said, and one of the first things she said to us last week was, "When I was 9, my parents divorced, and school was my safe place." And for many of our young people in our schools, school is their safe place. We have in our society, unfortunately, the breakdown of family structures. We have a lot of incidents of domestic violence, the incidents of family violence where adolescents are violent toward their parents is also on the increase. And don't think that it doesn't happen in your schools, because I'm sure that it does. And so for our students, school is often a safe place. This isn't a topic that we can fail to address anymore. We need to consider how we can make a difference in the lives of our young people. Post-traumatic stress disease, certainly for people who have some of these serious adverse childhood experiences, occurs following a traumatic event. And our young people can be in a situation where they perceive the threat as the same as that event. In our brains, if we've had a lot of trauma, there are particular parts of our brains, Dr. Whiteman was explaining to us as well last week, the amygdala, the hippocampus, which stores our memories, doesn't always code correctly the memories that it stores. And so it thinks that this stress is happening now, and that's what causes certain behaviours. Some of the students in your classrooms, because they are in a classroom with maybe 25 or 26 other young people, may well be hypervigilant. They're on high alert. Their body thinks that there is a threat that they need to deal with. And so those young people can react in one of two ways. We can have hyperarousal, the student who might have a sudden outburst in your classroom. This is their body reacting to a perceived threat. It's not misbehaviour. And this is a great concern to me, that many of the young people who come to our community schools have been asked to leave their school because of behaviours which are not really behaviours at all. They're reactions to stress. Perhaps more dangerous is the fact that some young people will have hypoarousal. So they're not the really out there ones that swear and throw furniture and have confrontations. The hypoaroused are the ones who withdraw into themselves. They don't speak. They might look in your classes like very good students, but really they're probably at a greater risk, because those who are more prone to hypoarousal are also more prone to dissociation, and they're then more prone to suicidal ideation. So it is very, very important that our teachers don't just say, this is the bad student who's misbehaving and this is the good student who's sitting quietly. It is really important that our staff know the students within their classroom, not just know them when they've done their assessment result and judge them on that basis, but know the student as an individual, know something about their background, know what their triggers are, because we can prevent the hyperarousal and hypoarousal. I always think when I'm talking to our students, and when I used to talk regularly or more regularly to the girls at Southside, I always used to think of Psalm 139. I am very grateful that at City Point you focus on this in grade 7, because this was very crucial for my child. I have an adopted child, so we have trauma in our background. This was very critical, because this says I have a purpose. God created me. He knew all of the experiences of my life, and he knew me before I was even formed. And he loves me and he cares for me, and I am special. And these are the sorts of protective factors that we need for our young people. Now, we could talk for hours and hours about these things, but I'd like you to do some talking together. There are 4 questions here, and at the end of our discussion time, we want to be able to come up with a takeaway. What's the one important takeaway that we have? You could be talking about how aware you are of the young people within your school who have mental health concerns, or how you could be more aware of those young people. You might choose to look at those Bible verses and look at God's heart for those with mental care health concerns, and how can we be the hands and feet of Jesus to those who have those concerns. So one major takeaway we would like at the end of our discussion time, and then also what's something that ACS can do to further this particular area for us. So I invite you to have good discussion. If you haven't already moved and you want to move and have discussion with a few different people, then I'll give you another opportunity if that's all right with you. And so we'll have some time for discussion. You've got plenty of resources. Have a bit of thought there about that particular issue. Well, I do hear a lot of productive discussion. Can I remind you that we would like to have one takeaway from your table and also one thing that ACS can do in this area moving into the future. And we'll have our roving microphone shortly. If we have a spokesperson from the table, who'd like to start us off?
One person. All right, beautiful.
Thank you. Among other things, what we're talking about is each staff is involved in this, just not the teachers. We're talking about groundsmen might pick up on crews in regards to trauma and then behaviour. And this is a whole staff approach, just not necessarily the teachers in the rooms.
Fantastic, thank you.
Christine speaks for us. What are you doing? Oh, good on you. What did I land on? So much. So I was very deliberate in asking if Christine's sitting here, I'm going to pick her brain apart. And I said, Christine, I'm just going to quickly share what you shared with me just now. And I just said, well, Christine, in our mainstream schooling, you obviously are very specialised. We are not. We Emerald and Kings and Parklands. How would we go about becoming aware of these needs in our communities? And it was very simple things, now that she's mentioned it to me. But, for example, she shared the example and said things like, look at your curriculum, Ruth. In the high school, you sometimes have to ask them to write biographies. Now, you might think nothing of that. Sit down, write a biography. But for a child who's had a past trauma, you're asking them to expose something about themselves that they're not ready to put on the table or put down on paper, and that can be a trigger for a child. And so I think, you know, while she said it, I thought, oh, that is so true, but then how do we know that? So I suppose, and then the common language at our table was relationship. You know, you need to form relationship with these children so that they do feel comfortable to come and be able to speak to you, or have an advocate, someone in the school that they know they can go to who will come to the rest of the staff body on their behalf and answer for them, fight for them, speak on behalf of them. So yeah, we found that really interesting.
A couple of things back to what we were talking about, because we talked a little bit around other things at this table, but just the idea of, for the whole school community, maybe we don't know enough about mental health and what's going on, and it could be that we intentionally go to either get guest speakers in, or that experience things of kids maybe going somewhere where kids with real extreme mental health problems, having a little buddy come along and have an excursion, and they get to know a little bit about some mental health problems and how they've been dealt with in a more severe area. Of course, there's plenty within the school community as well, and so and keeping on going with that, that would be I guess a new idea of what we could do. Probably the need with the growing awareness and the growing needs, as we've heard, just more resources being poured into this area as a school. And the last thing, structures. So it's helpful, especially a larger school, to have structures in place, because then you can pick up the needs that are there, and also that educational side of educating the whole community, staff, families, students, and not having it as something that's feared or worried about, but something that is just part of what we do because we are Christian, because we love everyone.
Okay, so we've discussed what we do in our school. So we have a responsible thinking classroom. So the kids we are quite aware of a lot of the mental health issues within our school, and then putting the structures in place around those kids at either the classroom level or those individual support levels, and even externally supporting the kids. One of the things I think about being the hands and feet of Jesus is knowing that for these kids, knowing that they are loved, and telling them that, being really intentional about telling them that, and talking to them about the anxiety or anything that they're experiencing, and trying to normalise it a little bit for them, I think, not making them think that they are different and that everyone experiences this at some stage in their life, and it should just be a phase that will eventually move on. I think that's really important for them to know that they don't have to be how they're feeling at that moment as a teenager. That's not how they're going to feel forever.
Leighton has instituted an incredible program in his school, but he's found the more he did, the more he needed to do. How do you explain that?
On the spot.
Leighton, he doesn't know.
That's it? Very good. All right. Thank you. This table here.
All right. Yeah. We probably came at it from a little bit of quite a few primary people here at this table, and just talking about, I suppose, parents in a more junior sense escalating kids, and kids that then therefore escalating their problems to huge problems rather than small problems. Awareness of the kids that really need help is definitely, it's there. Generally we can see those kids, but there's so many children that probably turn up to a pastoral care office in a week. How do we de-escalate? And I think City Point are doing a good job around language, talking to parents about it, getting programs in place that actually bring it back to, hey, this is not the worst morning in our lives. This is just a bit of a tough morning where we've arrived a little bit late at school. So parents bring back that language, and therefore if you're having less issues with that sort of general population of your school, you can concentrate then more on the children that have real issues. So I guess coming from that educational point of view with parents, and then hopefully that will lead to better results through senior school when kids really are grappling with a lot of things and they are self-diagnosing. So giving them the language and working within their peer group rather than seeking help outside of that. I think that sums it up. Yeah. Okay.
Firstly, Christine, I love that you're addressing this, and this has just been a brilliant presentation this morning. And I think I love it because this is a really hot topic for our school at the moment, and we're really trying to get our heads around this. As a school, it's growing rapidly in numbers, but also a change in demographic. We're seeing so much of this, and we're on that journey of trying to put structures in place, like everyone said, and how we do that well. But I've seen my role as almost being devil's advocate and asking questions I guess things like, I've actually said to my team as we go forward here, if a kid breaks a leg, we call an ambulance. If they're sick, we tell them, the parents, they've got to take them to the doctor. But if it's mental health, we'll take care of all your needs and we'll put a whole lot of resource into that. Not saying that's my belief. Oh, yes, it is. But that's the challenge that I see for us facing forward. How do we actually provide that service and look after our kids in this expanding area without getting an imbalance there, particularly when some of our parents won't necessarily follow through on our recommendations in that space. If a child's having trouble reading and we tell a parent to take them to the optometrist, 95% of the time they will. If our children are struggling with mental health and we recommend a counsellor, our experience is they won't necessarily. So they're the issues we're wrestling with, and I'm really happy to chat to people that have got that all figured out.
Firstly, Christine, also just to echo our thanks to you for raising this. And as you asked us for a takeaway, I'm not going to deal with the most serious of the issues you raised there, but certainly the most prevalent, and that's the levels of anxiety we're seeing across our students. And probably just, again, to say just a takeaway in terms of this, perhaps the changing nature of the family, of modern families and the structure of families, means there's not always clear definition of roles within the family, and I think we're finding that students once you interview and interact with families, that the anxiety, perhaps even the source of it, but in many cases contributing towards the anxiety, is the family structure behind the child. And so I think into the future for all of us, from a Christian perspective, to bring, to feed into families what Christ would see as the role of family members, including siblings and others in the family, so that there's a supportive structure. I think in the schools we are fulfilling a lot of those roles that we never used to, and we do it with God's grace and to the best of our ability. But I think in summary, engagement with families is, and supporting and assisting families is at the core of, well, is one of the things at the core of the anxiety, mental health issue, and that's probably addressing those last two bullets you've got there. So that's it. Thanks.
Sorry? Yeah, okay. Oh, thank you very much. It's fun when people at your table just point to you, don't they? One of the things we talked about, I think we agree with what everyone is experiencing, that there's an increasing frequency and probably severity in terms of what we're engaging in. And we constantly have to reflect on what's our role in triage of that or treatment of that. And because at the end of the day, if we keep throwing resources in treating, we're actually setting ourselves up with clinical services, and that brings certain challenges ourselves, but if we're trying to concentrate on triage and then getting the support in appropriate places. Challenge on the Sunshine Coast is that the average wait list, I think, is now about 7 or 8 months to see a professional. And so that approach is still a challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I've toyed with the idea of employing people in our school to actually deal with this shortage of professionals in our communities, because I would say that the answer for our schools is we can't do everything, and I agree with Michael that we need to invest in, beyond outsourcing, we need to invest in partnerships in our community, people that we can take our kids to, that we can refer our kids to, but also have a vested interest to work back with our community the other way, and that takes time and getting the right people. Don't know if you've experienced an antagonistic psychologist before, but they are very difficult to work with, and so on and so forth. And so getting those partnerships right, I think, are key, because we can't do everything, though I acknowledge that in our community there seems to be such a shortage of good mental health services.
So we've had lots of very good thoughts. Certainly, yes, I agree with many of these thoughts, particularly the ones where parents may not want to go to access mental health support. In our community schools, usually it's not they don't want to go, they can't afford to go, because if you want to see a psychologist, not too many of them bulk bill you, and that's a very expensive prospect. Certainly we need to remember, very importantly, it is the role of every staff member in a school, and it is a very relational role. A couple of questions that I haven't yet come to terms with: why are some of our students more resilient than others? Why can some recover from these traumas and others live in it? And another question: how can we expect our students to understand God as a father if they've lived in a house with a father who has not treated them well? That also is something I struggle with as well, some of the imagery that we use there. But certainly it is a growing area and something that we all need to come to terms with, and I hope we spend some more time talking about that in the future. Thank you.
Christine, thank you so much. This is just a small gift to say thank you. I personally just really loved how practical that one was. You know, it's just, our students are amazing. We love them all, and yes, they can be challenges, and especially in that space of mental health, it can be quite challenging. And you know, I dare say that everyone's heart here is to make sure that we set up our students to succeed and not fail. And certainly you've given us some very thought-provoking ideas to help us understand our students better, so that we can then teach them well. So thank you very much. Thank you. We are about to head into lunch very, very soon, but I would just like to invite Christian from Superloop to come and speak to us a little bit. Superloop are one of the sponsors for today, so thank you very much for your sponsorship to make today happen. And so let's just welcome Christian up. Thanks.
Good morning. Is it still morning? Yes, it is. Good morning, guys. Look, I'm not going to stand here and talk too much. I just really want to thank you all for your time and your support. For those of you who don't know me, my name's obviously Christian Gray, not the 50 Shades, not the real one. I am the real one. So, look, I'm the state manager for Queensland for Superloop Cyberhound. Who are we? Basically, we've got two arms to our business. The first being an internet connectivity or an ISP provider. So we provide bandwidth and internet connections for a number of ACS schools, but also a number of corporate and enterprise customers as well. The second of that, we are essentially a next generation firewall or a content web filtering provider. Again, a number of ACS schools. Great. We've been a long-term sponsor or supporter of ACS. Lynn, I think this is our 9th or 10th year together. Where's she gone? She ducked off. So we look forward to continuing that for many, many years to come. Look, I'm not one for big speeches and whatever, so it's great to be able to be here today, see some familiar faces, and for those of you I haven't met, I hope we can. I look forward to it. When you've got some time, pop down, say hello. Oliver Fyson, my colleague down the back, one of us would be happy to have a chat to you. There's some merch there for you guys to take. The more you take, the less I've got to take home, so please take it all. And we're also going to do a small raffle at the end of the day. So just drop your names in down there, guys, and we'll draw that prize at the end of the day. So thank you very much again, and God bless.
Thank you. We're about to go into some lunch, which is on this side of the auditorium. But before we do that, we might just say grace. So please join with me. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for lunch. We thank you for the food that we're about to eat. Bless it to our bodies, Lord. And we just thank you that your presence is so much with us as we discuss all the topics that we have, and we'll continue to after lunch. We pray, Lord, for a wonderful time of fellowship, of connection, and just of being together as a group of people under the banner of ACS. And Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity and bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen. So we have 1 hour for lunch. So utilise that time, 60 minutes. Make sure you eat and make sure that you have a chat. And if you haven't had a chat with someone that you've seen so far today, make sure you use that opportunity to at least say hello and ask them what's the best bit about their job. Thank you.